Question: why do some Australians become climate advocates while others remain skeptical, even when both are exposed to the same information? Understanding the dynamics of belief systems can help us answer that. I'm Kavesha, and today I'll take you on a little journey to discover how belief systems came to be and how we see it in action in every aspect of our life. So, of all topics, why climate change? Well, a Lowy Institute poll found nearly 2 out of 3 adults believe climate change is the most serious threat to Australia's national interests, an 18-point increase in 5 years. Australia has a big stake in climate change. It's one of the world's top greenhouse gas emitters on a per capita basis, and it's in the top 20 for total world pollution, with a footprint greater than Britain and France. We're also experiencing the effects of climate change, including increased heat waves and mass coral bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef, and it's also the global leader in mammal extinction, not to mention the recent algal bloom we've all been experiencing in South Australia. So, why is it important? For those of you who don't know, the 2019 Australian federal election was dubbed the climate election, where the opposition campaigned on a relatively ambitious climate action, but the government was returned on a status quo policy. It highlights how big of an issue it is to play out on such a national scale and even have a whole election named after it. Climate change, surprisingly, is quite a divisive issue among the Australian public, and there is a substantial disagreement over its causes, severity, and even policy responses. We can see a strong age cohort divide, with younger people holding stronger pro climate attitudes than older ones, and the same can be said for urban and non urban populations as well. The main tool to address this divide in opinions are belief systems. So, what's a belief system? Well, it's a system, first of all. It may be possible to have a single propositional belief about one thing, but generally speaking, these beliefs tend to hang together in a scheme. So we have a conceptual scheme which functions for an interesting way for each individual. That might sound a bit complicated right now, but let me simplify things for you. What are some strong beliefs you hold on to? Is it about religion, politics, or even who should have won that Academy Award at the Oscars, right? So, before we dive into the theory and maths, we need to have a clear idea of what a belief system is. It's basically like having a bubble around the individual, and this bubble consists of lenses which color and distort and shape what's outside the bubble. So, if you're inside a belief system or if you've adopted a belief system, it makes you see things systematically in terms of that system. For example, let's say someone becomes a dedicated communist in the 1930s, and so now everything they do is interpreted in terms of those communist beliefs. The same is true for science, but in the case of science, there's an important extra element, which is the self correcting nature of the scientific community. It basically comes to be that the members of the scientific community are very skeptical about what you claim and they want to replicate your tests. So there are these objective standards about the results of experimentation, which place a constraint on beliefs being spread. This is all due to the scientific method and the systematic way in which scientific findings are spread across society, right? But in the case of religion or politics, it's not there. It's like a matter of what the community believers have constructed for themselves and how they see things through that lens. Coming back to our debate about climate change, a UNSW study in 2022 found that Australians fell into 6 groups in terms of climate beliefs. They found that people could be placed on a spectrum with regard to their views on these beliefs. At one end would be the alarmed group, who are highly concerned people who were convinced of the science and were already taking action to mitigate these outcomes. On the other end were the non believers who were strongly skeptical about the genuineness of this climate change and went so far as to believe that climate change is a hoax. However, the 60% of people in the middle belong to the following categories: concerned, cautious, disengaged, and doubtful. And they had varied belief, awareness, and willingness to engage. I've dubbed them as the pliable group because they appear to be more open to change their minds. So, this brings us to my research questions. I want to explore what could potentially force each of these aforementioned six parties to change their own views, and to what extent do these six segments reach a consensus or agreement, or become increasingly polarized and reach a persistent disagreement on climate change beliefs when they discuss these topics with each other? And what happens if we were to vary the share of the population that each of these personas take up? So, how exactly do we apply these beliefs system dynamics to a climate change example? That's where the math comes in. Don't let the name of the model scare you just yet. We'll get into the important bits shortly. But formally, just to set some precedent, we will consider a population of more than two individuals discussing their opinions on more than one topics at the same time. And every yellow circle you see here is a single node or person in our belief system, and the black dots inside represent the logical interdependency between each topic for each individual. And that means I'll get into that more in a second, but basically, as they interact with each other, their beliefs will change. So, assume we have a group of individuals discussing two topics. Firstly, topic one, climate change is human driven. And topic two, investing in renewable energy would reduce Australia's contribution to climate change. First, we'll define each individual's opinion on the M topic starting at time t equals 0. So, for example, if we took xi0, which is an individual's initial belief system, if the one is positive, it shows that the person has strong belief that climate change is human induced, while if it was a negative one, it would indicate complete rejection that climate change is human induced. And the same example, the point two would indicate mild belief that investment in renewable energy would reduce Australia's contribution to climate change. So it's basically the weight assigned at the start for each topic. And moving on to the C matrix, this is how our own beliefs on different issues constrain each other, meaning how much a belief in one topic affects beliefs in another topic. So this C matrix shows how beliefs on different issues are dependent or independent. One of the key findings in a recent study was that the nature of this logic structure or C matrix, and especially the differences in the C matrix, played a major role in determining whether opinions on a different topic reached a disagreement or a consensus or agreement. So we'll see this visually in just a second. Finally, we have the W matrix, which indicates interpersonal influence, which is the degree to which one agent or person listens to or is influenced by another. This is basically interpersonal influence and how we as humans influence each other when we talk about different topics. Let's see this visually, right? This MATLAB simulation shows how two individuals discussing two different topics either reach a consensus or disagreement based on W and C. Here, they both have the same C, which is their individual constraints, but the result changes based on the level of influence they have on each other, which is denoted by W. In example 2, they have the same C again, but negative internal dependencies on the topics. In example 3, they still have the same C, but now the topics have more cross dependencies. As you can see, there are values for each one that are not 1, 0, or 1. And in example 4, they have entirely different logic matrices, C matrices, and in the final one, they have different Cs with the same magnitude, but one has a negative and the other has a positive dependency. So we can clearly see that even a slight change in the Cs and Ws will have an effect on the final result, being a consensus or a disagreement for each topic. So you're probably wondering, what's next? Now that we've identified the problem I want to address, which is Australians' beliefs on climate change, and also the exact mathematical model I can use for that, the next steps are clear, relatively. So I want to see how the six different persona will interact with each other about different climate change related topics and whether they will reach a consensus or a persistent disagreement based on all personas having the same C matrix, personas having different C matrices, or the level of influence each persona has on each other, which is denoted by the W matrix. And finally, maybe even get that model to a level where I can predict federal election voting outcomes based on climate change beliefs, holding all other variables constant. Food for thought. What are some topics you would apply this framework to? Was there any conversation you had recently with a peer that changed your mind about that topic? I'll leave you to it. Thanks for listening.